Alright guys, BLM here, back with a new video. In this video, I'll be reviewing the most recent season of Big Brother Canada, BBCan 8. And I definitely didn't plan on making this video this soon, but obviously with everything going on in the world, season got canceled, so here we are. So this is a really weird review to do. I mean, obviously the season got canceled. I mean, it was canceled after only 4 weeks. But I will still structure this like my other reviews. I will go through the season, or at least what we got of it, week by week, and also talk about the individual cast members along the way. And this was obviously even a weird season before it got canceled. In the 4 weeks of the game, only one person got formally evicted from the show. And in its final week, it was looking like we were going to get another abnormal exit. And it's a shame because coming into this season, it looked like this cast had a lot of potential. When going through my cast assessment, I really liked almost everyone there. And I even think coming into the next week, I thought we were going to have a pretty strong season from that point on. If we had lost Carol, we would have been in a spot where everyone left had something to bring to the table. But obviously, that's potential that we'll never see. Let's start talking about the season, starting off with week 1, which was an okay start to the season. I mean, like all of BBCan, they really rushed those first 2 episodes to get someone out by the end of episode 2. We get the typical big production of an intro, which is kind of just weird. I mean, like watching it, you would have no clue what Big Brother is. Like if you're just some random person turning the TV and seeing this, you're like, what is this show? But a lot of the premiere is your standard Big Brother Canada fare. We do get the announcement of the twist for the first week, and overall I'm mixed on it. I mean, it is better than the other twist BBCan has tried, but I don't love certain aspects of it. I don't love that Canada got to vote for their favorites in the preseason and the bottom 4 people were instantly put into jeopardy. And I don't like how that messes with people's mindsets in the game. They're starting off this game, those 4 people are thinking that Canada hates them, and that's not something that I like affecting the game. But I did like that there was no HOH, which gave us a more dynamic house as there was no one on top and no one to be the foundation of those initial alliances. Elvo gave the bottom 4 3 chances to save themselves by having a physical comp, a mental comp, and then a standard vote between the last 2. We obviously have Minh-Ly winning the physical comp, and in the second episode, which was an unprecedented night, they only repeated that like a billion times. Though, I mean, it certainly wasn't the last one for the season. We do get the start of the Jamar Minh-Ly showmance, and that was just a weird dynamic to watch, where they would spend most of their time talking bad about each other, but then sneak off into the pantry to make out. Like, it was just so weird. We see the mental comp, which was a quiz about BBCan action figures using the house guests to play as the action figures. I didn't like this. I mean, I don't like that unfairly put labels onto certain players. Kyle being called the comp beast and Maddie and Michael being put into a showmans. Like, again, that's stuff that production is kind of labeling on people that could put a target on them. With Chris winning that, it comes down to Nikko and Suzanne on the block. We see Sue creating a 6-person alliance with Carol, Brooke, Sheldon, Vanessa, and Kyle, which at the time I was really excited about. I mean, that was pretty much all of my preseason favorites. And while certainly some of those people were definitely flops, at the time that this alliance was put together, I was actually really happy about that grouping. But to be honest, that alliance didn't really end up mattering anyway because KVBS was the true core of the house. We do also have Minh-Ly getting into an argument with Kyle over her wanting her privacy, and while I do agree with Kyle's sentiment, he does come off as a dick here, and he really just comes off as a dick throughout the entire show. We do also get the start of the evictors, who sucked at the game. Like, while their surviving members did become more likable in the last couple weeks, played terribly here. I mean, really terribly. They completely isolated themselves from the rest of the house. But the round ends here with Nikko, knowing that he's going home, deciding to quit the game. And I know a lot of people were really upset about this. I do feel for him in a way. Again, I think being told that Canada doesn't like you when walking into this house is, again, that's not great for your mindset. And with him also losing 2 comps immediately after that, and knowing that his opposition on the block is more liked than him, it sucks, and I get it. I wouldn't quit, especially the day before the eviction, but I understand why he does. And I did find it interesting that it was shown in a positive light on the show, where production was really defending him, talking about how people's mental health is the most important thing. And like, this is the complete opposite of what we would see on Survivor. On Survivor, they would completely berate him, but that's the way it is. Let's talk about Nikko. There's not much to say. I mean, he was mostly a non-factor, but he did actually get a lot of screen time, mainly because of the position he was put in. I found him mostly boring. I feel like I was pretty right about him in my pre-game cast assessment. I'm happy he was the first one to go here, as I really like the other three as characters, and I felt like Nikko was probably the one that had to be dropped here. Now for week 2, which was a really fun week of the show, actually, which mostly came from Chris winning HOH, and I love Chris as a character. I mean, this entire comp is just really fun to watch, where like when he's in the lead, he's just like pointing to his brain and like flexing in the background. It's so weird. And he does start to get HOH-itis, where he starts talking about how he wants to take control of the game, and everyone is like freaking out because he was actually one of the targets coming into this week. But we do see Kyle go to work, flexing with him in the pantry. Together they come up with the backdoor Michael plan. And the Evictors this week just turned into a complete joke, where the entire house knows that they're together, and whenever they tell someone information, it spreads throughout the entire house. We did get the first Wendy's segment of the season, which was really funny, where Chris doesn't even recognize his own mom at first, despite him taking the time to read her name tag. But he eventually nominates Brooke and Hira as pawns to take out Michael. We get Minh-Ly coming up with the plan to convince the Evictors that she is the backdoor target to get them to use the veto, which I don't know why she was so apt to do this. I mean, I guess that's really the thing with Minh-Ly just in general, is that she's such a chaotic player and does things that are completely against her own best interests. But at the veto pick, we do learn that the HOH will still not play in the veto, and I don't mind this twist. I mean, yes, it benefits the alpha males in the game as they can't win back-to-back challenges, reducing their threat level, but I also think it makes it a lot more likely that someone that needs the veto will win it, and makes it more likely that the veto will be used, creating more drama, creating more gameplay. So overall, I do like this. We do get the veto comp itself, which is a really physical comp to the point where a lot of the players got injured, and also to the point where this is the initial cause of Carol wanting to quit the game. Hero wins the comp against a relatively weak field, with Vanessa pretty much being his only competition. We do get the start of the Minh-Ly targeting Kyle storyline, and the end of the show leaves out so much here, where we're being shown Minh-Ly telling Carol and Vanessa this plan, when in reality it was Vanessa that convinced Minh-Ly to do this. Which again makes no sense on Vanessa's part, and we'll talk about Vanessa later on, but I just have no clue what she was thinking throughout this entire game. And I love how she's in the diary room talking about how stupid Minh-Ly is to tell her this plan, when like, that was your plan. She's the main reason Kyle's game blows up this week, and Kyle thinks Vanessa's his closest ally. And to Vanessa also, like, they're in the KVBS Alliance, which is supposedly running the game. Like, it makes no sense from any aspect here. But we do eventually get to the veto ceremony, where Chris does put up Michael, blindsiding the Evictors, and we see John Luke get really pissed off and like eating up pillows and stuff. We have Maddie starting a confrontation with Chris immediately afterwards. We have Chris and Michael eventually talk, and this is one of my favorite scenes of the entire season, where Michael literally goes up to him and says, all right, one thing, you're a great guy. Number 2, you're a coward. But I didn't love how indignant the Evictors were this week, and that's a thing that I think kind of gets forgotten about now, because the Evictors did become underdogs in the future weeks. But I think during this week, they were really indignant over how they were playing the game honestly, and how could anyone betray them and stuff. It's like, do you not know what game you signed up for? I mean, like, especially Maddie, considering she is such a fan of their show. It's like, how do you not expect this? Then we get some chaos from Minh-Ly telling Michael to call out Kyle, which leads to a pretty fun argument between the two. But we get to the vote, and while a potential flip was in the cards due to Vanessa's lunacy, Michael still gets taken out here. And I was really bored by Michael in the preseason, and he was exactly what I expected. I mean, he talked about honor and loyalty, and he was flabbergasted when people dared to blindside him. I find it really funny that people seem to really like him now just because he was on Jamar's side after the season, forgetting how indignant he was after his blindside, how he would spend most of his time in the house complaining. A major downfall of his game is that he wouldn't socialize with anyone outside of the Evictors Alliance, which if he had just been the generic social guy that he came into the house being, he would have been poised to make it a lot further than he actually did. And it's really weird that out of the entire season, he's the only one that actually get evicted. And that pretty much ends the only normal week out of the 4 weeks of the game here. Now for week 3, which is where everything starts to go downhill. I mean, the Nikko quit was weird, but not damaging to the season as a whole. But everything about this week was so strange, and I don't think production handled any of it correctly either, but we'll get to that. We had a fun HOH comp where there was a ball pit and people had to put balls in other people's tubes to eliminate them. And that really exposed the dynamics within the game, and I like that, though it is actually unfair to the minority, as it guarantees that someone within the majority, or at least someone in good favor with the majority, will win the comp. And we do get Sheldon winning HOH, putting KVBS in power. I do think despite what actually happens here, I think Sheldon does a pretty good job with his HOH. I mean, despite putting up Maddie, Rianne, and Minh-Ly, he's able to keep very solid relationships with them afterwards, and also with having a very good relationship with Jean-Luc. I mean, like, he was actually coming into next week pretty well positioned. We did get Jamar being really pissed that Sheldon didn't do what he wanted and not targeting Chris and Kyle. But to me, I mean, like, he was just being outplayed and didn't realize that Sheldon was never loyal to him and was always more loyal to Kyle. We do get the veto comp where they have this twist where they're paired up and the winning team will be safe with the original player getting the veto. And this leads to some drama with Min where she picks Vanessa, who again is a lunatic and kept on throwing her allies under the bus. She gives Min some info, such as Brooke telling her to throw the veto so that Min wouldn't have the power, which never actually happened. Again, it was mostly the entire alliance of KVBS doing that, mostly Sheldon actually. But Vanessa just seemed to dislike Brooke the entire season for like no real reason. But I did find it funny that Vanessa tells Min not to tell anybody, and immediately after, Min goes to Carol and Hira and tells them. But this causes Kyle to learn about Vanessa leaking information, and there is a confrontation between the alliance, which is fun. Veto comp was fun to watch, where the pairs had to move balls with their mouths, and it provides some funny moments, like getting to see Chris and Kyle just sucking at the comp and them stopping in the middle of the comp just to eat cookies. And Brooke and Sue also were a disaster during this as well. But Maddie and Jean-Luc win the veto. Sheldon nominates Min, as there wasn't really any other option for him, and it looks like Min is supposed to be going home. Then we get to the eviction episode, which was just so weird to watch. I mean, we start off with Arissa working from home, announcing that 2 people have been removed from the house. We see them learning about the pandemic, which was a really real moment for the show. We see Carol's joke about Jamar and kind of apologizing, which I was surprised that the show decided to air, as they usually try to avoid things like this, especially on Big Brother Canada. And I do find it weird they showed this, but not the actual thing that happened at that house meeting. We have the first Vanessa and Minh-Ly confrontation after Min finds out that it was Vanessa that ratted her out, and this leads to the house meeting where Vanessa gets called out for lying about wanting to target Kyle, when I don't even know what the truth was with Vanessa. But this went disastrously for Min, where she was still the target afterwards, and most of the players looked at this meeting as a joke. But this is where, again, not on the show, Jamar and Kyle start an argument, and Jamar makes some questionable comments, leading to him getting removed from the game. And I mean, this was ridiculous. I mean, I fully believe Jamar should have gotten a warning. I mean, what he said wasn't particularly great, but it's definitely not something to kick him out over. I mean, that's completely ridiculous. We've had situations in the past where Dylan has talked about knocking Dallas's teeth out in BB Can 5 and nothing happened there. So if you're not going to enforce it for Dylan, why enforce it for Jamar? And I also just don't understand production's reasons for not showing this on the show outside of them covering their asses. And I do think that was a major part of the disaster of a week that we had here, because obviously we learned immediately after this that Kyle gets ejected as well. And supposedly what happened is that Kyle was telling production that he was threatened by what was happening with Jamar, and that's eventually what led to them ejecting Jamar. But I think they realized the backlash that they got, and they were like, screw it, at this point we might as well eject Kyle as well to cover our ass, and that's what they did. And again, I think none of them should have been ejected. I mean, should Kyle have been taking advantage of this to benefit his game from a rule standpoint? No, obviously not. But I think this mostly lands on production. The fact that they decided to actually go along with what Kyle was doing and kick out Jamar for that. I think that's very poor decision making on their end. And then for them to eject Kyle after this as well is 100% to me them trying to look like the good guys in this situation. I love how like they don't even really clarify why Kyle gets kicked out on the show. Like there's not even really an explanation outside of he made some questionable comments earlier. And like, yes, he did. He did make some questionable comments. But again, certainly not something you get kicked out of the game for. I do think once you eject Jamar though, I think you kind of have to eject Kyle. But again, the fact that either of them got ejected is ridiculous to begin with. But who cares, because the season got canceled, so it doesn't really matter. After this, we do get the announcement of a full reset, meaning that Sheldon gets to compete in the next HOH. But again, this was just such a disaster of a week. I mean, we had 2 ejections, both of which were completely unjustified in my eyes. We have Carol still wanting to quit. And to me, production just doesn't come out of this looking good. But let's talk about the 2 ejected players, starting with Jamar. Jamar was great TV. I mean, he was a different character from anything we've seen on Big Brother before. He was overly cocky, but in a really endearing way. But I also think he was a pretty terrible player, if I'm being honest. I think he played very emotionally. I think he was completely outplayed by Sheldon and Kyle, and that's what pissed him off to the point where the house meeting and the confrontation with Kyle happens. I mean, he keeps on talking about how no one wants to make a big move and how Sheldon is making weak moves, but it's like, no, Sheldon's actually making the smart move, and Sheldon had no incentive to go after Kyle. And just because Sheldon's not playing in Jamar's best interest doesn't mean he's a weak player. But Jamar initially was a likable figure within the house, and it was until he started going after Kyle that he lost all semblance of power within the game, to the point where he was probably going to be booted the next week anyway if he had stayed. But again, he is a great character nonetheless. And now let's talk about Kyle, and boy was I wrong about Kyle in my cast assessment video. I was right about his positioning. I was just wrong about his attitude. I mean, I thought he would come in as more passive of a player, someone like a John Party, but instead he came in as a really aggressive player, someone like an Andrew Gordon. I mean, he was part of the initial majority alliance, and it wasn't until Vanessa started throwing him under the bus that he started to become a massive target in the house. I do actually think he had one of the better strategic minds for the game. The problem is that he had too much of a domineering personality to make it to the end, and probably would have been taken out within the next few weeks if he hadn't been ejected. That being said, I do think he made a lot of questionable comments, did a lot of questionable things while in the house that do kind of sour my opinion of him just as a whole. But now let's move on to week 4, also known as the last week in the game. I mean, this entire week was pretty slow too. Unlike weeks 2 and 3, which were filled with crazy gameplay, this week was filled with debate over whether or not to honor Carol's wishes, because Carol wanted to quit. But we start off with the endurance HOH that was really upper body intensive. So it was clear that either Chris or Sheldon were going to win this, and Sheldon ends up winning, which was a questionable move for him to win 2 HOHs in a row. But considering Kyle, one of his closest allies, just got ejected, I understand why he did it. But he was actually in a pretty solid social position. But for the second week in a row, he wasn't able to get what he wanted done, as he wants to target Minh-Ly again, but Carol wants to quit, but not in a normal way. She doesn't want to just leave. She wants to force everyone to vote her out. And it made this week really boring, and it seemed clear that Carol was going to go home, as every time Sue or Sheldon would mention flipping the vote on Min, it would just get turned down right away. Sheldon does get the Wendy's power here, which just seemed like last minute product placement to satisfy Wendy's in the case that the show ended, which it obviously ended up doing. And he could have either played in the veto or cancel single vote. I mean, these powers really just suck. I mean, canceling a vote could have played a factor during this week where he wanted to get rid of Min, but again, more than likely it wouldn't have led to anything. The veto episode that aired after the show's cancellation here was pretty slow, as again, none of it really mattered. But then we got to the final episode of the show that aired 1 week after the show's actual cancellation, and this was weird to watch, as we do start off with a really dramatic intro that BB Can usually does for its finales, but obviously it was just so strange that it was in this circumstance. But the show pretty much starts with the players learning about the cancellation, and obviously everyone is devastated. I mean, Brooke and Suzanne seem to take it the worst. I personally would have been really pissed if this had been the way that my season would have ended, and my opportunity to play the game is gone, as more than likely a lot of these players are never playing Big Brother again, and that just sucks, especially for the super fans like Brooke, Sheldon, Sue. I mean, really just everybody. I mean, it just sucks that this had to happen at this time. And for Aaron Brock to say after that just remember that you provided a much needed distraction for the public. It's like, I would have been even more pissed off after that comment. It's like, I don't care about distraction for the other people. I care about my game, my experience. And obviously I understand why this needed to be done. And it was the correct move when we're looking at the outside world, but it just sucks for the people involved. And for the people that had their like one opportunity slip away from them due to like a once in a lifetime situation. But after the announcement, they are given one last night in the house, and we see a lot of the aftermath with a lot of Sheldon and Brooke consoling each other. We have Sue being consoled by Chris. We We later see everyone eating dinner and like revealing their secrets, like Sheldon being a wrestler and the existence of KVBS. And we have the final day where Arissa comes on screen and they see a montage of fun moments. We get the announcement that the prize money is going to a response fund. We get videos from home, and then we have people slowly leave, starting with Carol. Thank God she was the first to leave. And then the evictors, then Angie, then Hira, then Chris and Sue, then Vanessa. And I love how Brooke and Sheldon were left in the house with Min, the person that they were targeting that week, and how they were talking about how great of an alliance they would have been. It felt like pre-gaming for All-Stars or something. But then we have Min leave, and we are left with Brooke and Sheldon as the final two. And that was definitely the right choice, I think, to save them for last. It just felt right. I mean, they were running the game. They had a really strong bond. But I also like how they had the people exit the house, kind of either in groups or in individuals, as it gave us a final goodbye to most of these players. But the finale here was just weird to watch. Again, a very different finale from what we're used to, and hopefully one we'll never get again. And obviously the cancellation announcement was really disappointing, especially because this was such a terrible week. And the following weeks looked like the game was going to pick up, but it obviously had to happen. It sucks that we were in the position that had to be the case. Though I do question some decisions, though. I still do question why they didn't accelerate the season from even before this. As again, we already knew this pandemic was happening, so if they knew that cancellation was a possibility, why didn't we just like kind of rush through the season? And also, I wish we could have like pre-taped the rest of the season, like do like an eviction a day and like have that air like once a week over the next few weeks, so that they would have content to air on TV, and we would get a conclusion to the season with the winner of the season without putting the crew in harm's way. But I think obviously you run into problems with like the comps and stuff, but still, it's something that I wish we could have gotten, but we didn't. I really feel bad for the players here. I really feel bad for Brooke and Sheldon, especially again as they were running the game. I think Sheldon was the clear front runner to win. I see almost no way he doesn't get to the end game. And to see his game cut short really sucked. And even if he were to return in the future, I mean, people would now know his game. But I would personally like to see a lot of these players play again. I know people have mentioned like having more of these people than normal on All-Stars whenever that eventually happens, but I propose instead, I know this will never happen, but I would love if this happened, a half returnee season where all of the returnees come from BB Can 8. Like obviously that gives a massive advantage to BB Can 8, but I would really like to see it. I think there's enough. Like if we had like 8 of these people return. You do Sheldon, Chris, Hira, Jean-Luc, Maddie, Brooke, Sue, Minh-Ly. I think you got it there. Will it happen? No, but I think it would be really fun if it did. Then let's talk about the rest of the cast and what I thought about them at the time of the cancellation, starting with Angie. And Angie was probably the player with the least going on. She didn't really have many relationships within the house, no alliances. She didn't seem to have respect by many of the players within the house either. But I do think she had some potential moving forward. I just have a hard time seeing her win the game. Now for Brooke, and Brooke and Sheldon were, as I said, running the game. I mean, they were perfectly positioned in the middle of the house. Now I will say that I do think Sheldon was better positioned for the end game, where Brooke had some people that simply just didn't like her for some reason, and also seemed to be perceived as like the brains of the duo. So I do think Brooke goes home over Sheldon in most scenarios, but that wouldn't have been until later in the game. I mean, I liked Brooke on this season. I think she had a good strategic mind for the game. I would have been interested to see if she ever did turn on Sheldon, as I do think she would have needed to win the game. But I liked her on this season. I was rooting for her. I was rooting for that duo of Brooke and Sheldon, and it looked like they were prepared to dominate the game. But now we'll never be able to actually see it. And now for Carol, I have nothing positive to say about Carol. I mean, I liked her in the preseason, but she just sucked on this season. I mean, she did nothing the entire season. She had no motivation to play the game. She spent most of her time wanting to quit, more than likely just because she realized she had no shot at winning the game, especially after how bad she was in challenges. I would have had more respect for her if she did quit the game over holding the game hostage and telling everyone to vote her out instead, just so that production would pay her way home. She talked about how she wanted to be an inspiration to people at home. It's like, by quitting? Like, what did you do that was inspirational? What, getting on the show? I mean, they're obviously going to pick someone of your archetype at some point. It's like, what are you doing that's inspirational? Again, I feel like it's the complete opposite, but whatever. I mean, she sucked at the game. She didn't want to play. Whatever. She sucks. Moving on. Now for Chris, and I thought he was a fantastic character. I mean, it was fun to see all of his weird quirks. It was great to see him thinking that he's dominating the game while people were like kind of just making fun of him in the background. I liked watching his relationship with Maddie. I thought that was fun. I think overall he had a fun presence on the show, but as a player, I mean, I think it was pretty clear he wasn't long for the game. He was a major target for a good amount of the house. People like Kira and the Victors were going directly after him. And while he was good at comps, I think everything he can do, Sheldon can do better. So I don't have much faith in him winning the game, but I do think he could have made it through a few more rounds just sheerly off of winning comps. Now for Hira, and I think Hira was pretty likable in this season. I think he was starting to pick up the game a bit, where he was initially really hung up on playing with honor, but he did start to play a bit more deceivously in the last couple weeks. He was in numerous alliances, but I do think he had some issues finding a number one ally. He was aligned with the Evictors, but it was obviously they were all closer to each other than to him. He was aligned with Brooke and Sheldon, but they were more loyal to Colin and Vanessa, and even planned on targeting him soon. He had a deal with Minh-Ly, but he took that as a joke, as, again, she openly had deals with many people. So I don't have much confidence in him winning the season, as I don't think he had the allies to do so, but he could have been an interesting player moving on. Now for JL was fine. Pretty much a more interesting version of Michael, or kind of a more interesting version of Derek from BB Can 6. He did initially isolate himself with the Evictors, but in the last couple weeks, I do think he started to branch out and create decent relationships with Hira, Brooke, and Sheldon. But he was also looked at as a physical threat, and as he was still associated with the Evictors, I don't think he was a likely winner. But I did find him more entertaining than I thought he would be. Now for Maddie, and I liked Maddie coming into the season, but at the start of the season, I found her really indignant, and she was surprisingly bad at the game, where she would talk about how much of a superfan she was, but she was surprised after finding out people had multiple alliances. After Michael's eviction, she did become more likable and found herself in a better position, but I still don't think of her as a good player. I mean, she might have had a good underdog sort of run on the season after Min went home, but I don't really have much confidence in her winning ability either. Now for Min, and I was 1000% correct about her in the preseason. She was a terrible player. She was someone who made a lot of unforced errors that put her in danger, someone that wasn't able to make genuine social bonds, someone that was focused so much on creating chaos without much thought on whether or not it would backfire on her. I mean, she was a bad player. She would have been voted out already if it wasn't for the ejections, but she was a fun character. I do think she made for good TV. She was a fun underdog, but she was an underdog entirely due to her own actions. Her personality plus her haphazard style of play is never going to work on a season Big Brother. I'm not really liking how she's been acting after the season either. Now for Rianne, and I was right about Rianne as well. I found her pretty boring. I mean, she did nothing in the game. She didn't have a strategic bone in her body, but she was really good socially. She was able to make solid bonds with people, but not in a way that made those people feel indebted to keep her. It was in a way that made her a target due to her being a social threat, as she was targeted in week 3 solely because of this. She was a nothing character, and her lack of agency in the game made her just really boring to me. So, I mean, overall, I just didn't see her winning this season either. Now for Sheldon, and I really feel bad for Sheldon. I mean, he talked about how he wanted to be one of the best players ever, and based on how he played so far, he was on trajectory to possibly do that. I mean, he was the center of the house. He had alliances with everyone there, and despite 2 straight HOHs, he still wasn't anyone's target for the foreseeable future. I mean, he faced an abnormal amount of adversity, with his first HOH getting canceled after putting up 3 people, and his target Min getting saved by this. He loses one of his closest allies in Kyle during his HOH. He had a complete lunatic of a player in Vanessa in his alliance, constantly throwing her allies under the bus, but somehow Sheldon easily maneuvers his way back into an amazing position after this. And Sheldon started to remind me a lot of Tyler from BB20 in terms of his positioning, and it's such a shame that we'll never see how it turns out for him. Though I see no way he gets taken out before the final 6. He was in such a brilliant position. I think the biggest problem for him is that everyone knew that him and Brooke were together. It's not like Tyler, where Tyler came into that endgame where everyone thought they were in final 2s with him. I think there's no way people think they're in a final 2 with Sheldon. I think they think that they're in the final 3 with Sheldon and Brooke, but I think there are going to be points where he could have been targeted in that end game. So it's not like a situation where I was like 100% Tyler was going to be in the final 2 from relatively early on in that season. It's not the same case with Sheldon here, but I do think there was obviously a lot of potential there, especially with how good he was at competitions. Now for Suzanne, and I really liked her as well. I mean, I really underestimated her social game coming into this season, and the first couple weeks she was in the best position in the house, but I do think people started to realize just how social she was being with everybody. And kind of like a Rianne, I do think she would make these bonds with people that were just making her a target. But I think unlike Rianne, I feel like Suzanne had a decent strategic mind for the game, though I think that's also what made them look at her as like the female Kyle, and that put a target on her back. And then when Minh-Ly also got jealous of her relationship with Jamar, I think Sue just started to lose it a bit and was probably going to be taken out in the next couple weeks if I were to guess, but she still has a lot of potential there. Again, I think she had a good mind for the game. She was another one that seemed to really want to be there, and it sucked for her season to end due to this, again, massive anomaly. And finally, we have Vanessa, and I've already said this, Vanessa is a lunatic. It's so funny how wrong I was about my top 2 picks in my cast assessment. I mean, I thought Vanessa was either going to be an Erica-style player or a Willow style of player, and she was neither. I mean, she would just do everything she could to worsen her position in the game by ruining the games of her allies. Kyle started to get targeted due to Vanessa bad-mouthing him to the house and then turning them against him. Vanessa also tried to blindside Brooke and fought to keep Brooke on the block when they were part of KVBS. I mean, she was spilling all of her info to Min, and Min would obviously just spread it throughout the entire house. And then she would also throw Min under the bus to KVBS, causing Sheldon to eventually target her. I mean, Vanessa was just all over the place, and to be honest, she's a lot of what made weeks 2 and 3 so fun to watch, but I just have no inkling of where her game was going. If I were to guess, I would say she would have been taken out relatively soon because she was starting to be looked at as a pair with Chris, but I really just can't figure out what was going on in her head. So that's pretty much everything I have to say about BB Can 8. I mean, I think it had so much potential as a season moving forward, but with where we are in the world right now, it didn't make sense to continue. There's just too many factors in play here, from the crew safety to the player safety, that just made this the right call. It sucks for the players in the game. It sucks for the crew as well, and I feel bad for people like Brooke and Sheldon. Even if they do get the chance to return in a future season, I think they are going to be harmed by the fact that people know their games now. Though I wouldn't be too surprised to see them play in the future, especially because this season's ratings were pretty strong. I have no doubt that we will get BB Can 9 in the future, which I will obviously cover when that season comes around, whenever it comes around. But that's pretty much it. That's the video. That's my review of BB Can 8. Thank you for watching.